Okay, so can you talk to me a little bit about how the project began? Like, how did you start working with the team at the Mary Rose Museum?
Yeah, sure. So I don't know how far back you want me to go. I'll keep the backstory kind of shortish, and you can let me know if you want to explore more. But I got onto a program called Story Futures Fellowship here in 2020. It would have been, and it was to explore how we could bring more immersive experiences and storytelling to cultural heritage sites. And we actually did a prototype around the Lost Palace of Oatlands in Surrey, which is a palace. It used to be Henry VIII, our famous king with the 6 wives, his queen's palace. Obviously the queens alternated, but the palace stayed. But it got knocked down in like the 1700s, and then now it's got like a housing estate built over it. So it was kind of using AR to bring that back to life. And we already kind of came up with the idea of multisensory AR. So we had, for example, like, because Queen Elizabeth lived there after Henry VIII's queens, and we sort of reimagined her bedroom in AR, and then we literally brought the scent of her perfume, which we know the recipe of from the Royal Horticultural Archives here in the UK. So as you entered that space, you not only saw it in augmented reality, but you smelt her presence, which I thought was very cool. And so then when we got the funding for the main full game, because that was just a smaller prototype, we were talking to some different leading cultural heritage sites, like the usual suspect. We approached like Windsor Castle and Tower of London and Shakespeare's birthplace, and different places that most international audiences would know as well, probably. And then we got talking to the Mary Rose, and we were on a relatively tight timeline. We had to, with the funding we'd secured, we had to complete production in about 6 months. So the Mary Rose were the only ones who kind of were, because they're a bit smaller than some of those others I mentioned, they were able to be a bit more nimble. So we ended up doing it with them. And the Mary Rose, for anybody who doesn't know, was not one of Henry's wives, but his favorite warship. That was sunk with all 500, and almost all 500 sailors and soldiers on board died in that sinking. And the sinking's kind of remained a mystery as to why it happened. So that's what we're exploring in the game.
So is that mystery what made the Mary Rose Museum end up on your list of museums to historical places to go to in the first place?
If I'm honest, no. We figured that it's got it had quite a long history, and there's quite a few interesting stories to do with the Mary Rose herself. So we weren't too worried. We approached them because it was kind of, although, like I say, not as big as the Tower of London, for example, it's still a pretty key site. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to think why we did get talking to them in the first place. I think that was really it. And then once we started to explore a little more and scratch beneath the surface, we discovered that there were even more stories than we realized, including like this major sort of elephant in the room that we don't actually know why she sank. And even though there's different evidence for different reasons, obviously. And then also the fact that one of the things I said on my first call with the Mary Rose is we're really keen to make the storylines more diverse, because actually people think of Tudor England as white England, and it wasn't actually. It was quite a relatively diverse society. So they discovered a third of the crew were not white Englishmen, and so that was really interesting to us, because they've been doing DNA analysis and other kinds of analysis on the skeletons and such like. So yeah. It was all of those reasons, I think.
That's fascinating. So you were somewhat familiar with the Mary Rose beforehand?
Yeah, I grew up, my mother's a history nut. So, we were dragged around every museum. Her and her friend dragged us around every museum you can imagine under the sun, and every other historical site. So whether I liked it or not, and some of that I found some of it I did find interesting, some of it less so, but it was normally just to do with how it was presented, always is, isn't it? Because actually a lot of the stories are totally fascinating, but if you're sitting in a dry history class, or you're experiencing like an immersive experience that takes you back into that moment, they're two entirely sort of different things. So I think I grew up kind of a little bit surrounded by history. And I also had an amazing history teacher in secondary school when I was kind of 15, 16, I guess, for like what we call history GCSE, which would be the lead up to your SATs, would it? I'm not sure.
I think so.
Yeah, she was really hard. Like if you didn't do your homework, you were in for some serious grief. But she was really passionate and good. And so I think after that, I was also kind of more enthused.
Yeah, I like what you said about how history is fascinating, but the way that it's presented is so dry. Because I remember in my English, I think English class around the same time, we were reading the Canterbury Tales, and it's dry. And then my English professor was like, "You guys do realize how raunchy and debaucherous these stories are?" But like we didn't, because it was so dry.
Yeah, you weren't really reading the subtext.
Yeah. So do you think AR is the future for museums? Because obviously if you go to the Mary Rose Museum, you get to see the actual ship, but there is something that it still feels separate. Like it still feels very old, and like it's hard to kind of put yourself in that place. So do you think AR is what is going to help historians and museums really get to this younger generation?
Yeah, I mean, I actually think that AR is the future of quite a lot of things, not only museums, as it happens. But yeah, I definitely think AR can do huge amounts in museums, because one of the, I mean, ultimately, if there was endless amounts of cash, which we all know there isn't, especially right now in that whole sector, but you know, if there's endless amounts of cash, there's all kinds of different immersive exhibits which would do amazing, you know, things for museums and cultural heritage spaces. But AR is that much more affordable. It can still bring the place to life in incredible ways, but it doesn't cost the amount that creating VR experiences would do, or, you know, big immersive installs. In fact, the Mary Rose itself, they have been pretty forward thinking. Like as you walk in, you actually go through another immersive experience, which is kind of a projection mapping experience, and there's a hologram and such like. So you know, they have kind of already explored that a bit, but I think this was great because that's just a kind of one experience which is really nice, and you walk through it, and then you're in the museum with all the artifacts and, like you say, the ship itself. And there wasn't actually any immersive experience. Well, you know, there's immersive sound and there's some projections actually, so I shouldn't say there isn't, because I don't want to get called out on that. There is some, but you know, the great thing about augmented reality, and specifically like what we're doing in this augmented reality game, is we're putting photorealistic characters into that space. So like, you're not just going to see a little photo fit image of what the captain looked like based on a historical portrait or whatever, but you're actually going to feel like you've met him and spoken to him, because he does look photorealistic. It's not like Pokemon Go where you're seeing some kind of more simplistic anime character. So that's one of the key things, I think. And also one thing that people are finding quite fun, even though actually technologically this isn't the most advanced thing we're doing, is that because they had those skulls, they actually had 179 of the roughly 500 skulls of the people on board, and they were able to reconstruct facial features much like you do, you know, when you've got a victim of a murder or what have you. So they've got those artistic impressions of what the carpenter looked like and the cook looked like and certain other key characters. So they've got those pictures in the museum, and so, you know, holding the phone up while you're playing the game to those pictures brings them to life, and they tell you another part of the story that gives you a clue, or you eavesdrop on a conversation that they're having, and things like that. So actually people are really enjoying that, even though, like I say, it's not necessarily it's not in our minds, it wasn't as innovative as the two main characters, who are these photorealistic, almost like 3D holograms, similar, if that's something easier for people to get their minds around. Yeah, but people are enjoying that as well. So, and then with the artifacts, like one of the artifacts we have is this Maltese cross, which is a piece of jewelry, and it's all kind of crappy looking, you know, because it's all, you know, years under the sea has just kind of eroded it, and it just looks kind of grey and what have you. So we've kind of, obviously in the AR experience, you can kind of bring that back to life. You can see it as it was, like a really beautiful piece of jewelry, ruby encrusted jewelry, and you can kind of, you know, find out more about that. So that's quite nice, because sometimes, you know, stuff that's been, I don't know, under the water or buried or whatever for like a long time all looks a bit kind of muddy and a bit dull, and, you know, so that's also another fun part of the AR experience, I think.
Yeah, I got to play it at home. I'm obviously not in Portsmouth, so I didn't get to
Yeah.
do the whole experience. So I
Yeah.
was curious about the scent. You briefly mentioned it when you were talking about the perfume of Queen Elizabeth, but what are the scents that are involved in this version of Time Detectives?
Yeah. So the actual, do you want to know the actual smells?
Yeah, I
Or
would
yeah.
love to.
Yeah. Well, just in terms of, I'm sorry I don't have one here. Otherwise, I could have shown it to you. I think you do see it in the trailer if anyone's going to see that. But you wear a little scent backpack basically, and there are sort of hidden tubes that come just over, through the shoulder strap, and then they release around here. But it's not kind of a gimmicky spray in your face kind.
Mhm.
It's a dry scent that emanates from it. So yeah, it's not overpowering. But we have, so I think the first scent that releases is sea spray. So to give you that impression that you are obviously at sea, you get the smell of like the ocean air. And then when you fire the cannon, because one of the clues to why she sank is connected to the cannons.
Mm-hmm.
When you can interact with that cannon and fire it. And when you do that, you get the smell of the gunpowder, the release of the gunpowder. And then when you're with one of our key characters fixing a leak in the hold, which is down, in the bottom of the ship, you smell like the molten tar or pitch that they used to fill in the holes. And that's quite a strong smell, actually, and very realistic. You sort of feel a bit like you're with a modern day road layer or whatever. And then what's that? Oh, we've got beer because they used to drink beer, not water, on board. And in fact, they got through quite a lot. I'm trying to remember the amount that it's something like 14 pints a day.
Oh, wow.
Each person, because they were drinking it instead of water, right? So they were drinking it to keep hydrated. But you kind of wonder how anything got done on 14 pints a day. So it could be one of the reasons for the sinking right there, to be honest with you. But yeah. So we got beer, and we've got one more. Oh yeah, Tudor pomander. So a pomander is this thing that they hang around their neck, and it's a ball basically. Mm-hmm. You might have seen them. Sometimes you just Christmas decorations, very similar, where you get an old orange and you tie it to a string and you stick kind of cloves in it. Yeah, they do. If you were you could do that if you were from a poor class, and if you were kind of posher, you would have like some beautifully enameled metallic pomander with maybe rose water or whatever inside. So you've got the smell of pomander that we waft under your nose every so often when you're experiencing a couple of the nastier smells like the sour beer or whatever. We'll give you a waft of pomander afterwards to make that okay again. But yeah.
So you had a 6-month turnaround time, but it sounds like I feel like it could take 6 months to just research and perfect the smells. So how big was your team? Like, what was the process of getting this done in 6 months?
It was pretty mental, if I'm honest. Like, it was pretty intense. We have been working for a while with a Swiss perfume house called Givaudan, who you may never have heard of, but they make all the Tom Ford and Chanel and da-da-da. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to officially release that. Hopefully I am. But, and it all gets rebranded. They make pretty much everything. I think they are the biggest or the second biggest scent house in the world. So we've made a couple of previous experiences with them. They kind of sponsor us, which is amazing. And for that, they get kind of, I guess, press and that kind of thing. But they're really great. And they didn't have capacity for this one. Their perfumers were really busy. So they put us onto a UK kind of partner company, or maybe it's a subsidiary called Fragrance Oils. So actually they did a lot of the work perfecting the scent and sent us a couple of iterations. We weren't kind of full-time on that, I should say. And then we've got a scent device company, which is not my company, a company I work very closely with called OW. They used to be called O Widgets, so I want to call them that still, but OW, Smell Made Digital. And so they've been working on the actual device itself. And so myself and my team, we were working on kind of the creative, the storytelling. We did decide which scents we wanted. So as soon as we had the kind of script and stuff written, we decided on the scents and started that ball rolling. But it was a cool team. We were only about 5.
Oh, wow.
I think myself on the creative front, my producer, who's Siobhan McDonnell, our sound guy, Jake Lee Savage, most importantly, probably of all, our lead developer, Grigor Todorov, and someone else, Anakin Ryan, who did our 3D modeling, yeah. So yeah, it's probably like five people in the core team, and then actors, of course, the actors as well. Oh, and Mandy Steele, our casting agent. So I'm putting out all those. She's amazing though, she really is amazing, so she does deserve a shout out as well.
That's awesome. So do you have any potential other like working with other museums or other historical places that are in the works?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say in the works in the sense that we're not already developing any of the new games. What I really wanted to do was to kind of launch this one, see if it could live up to expectations in terms of, you know, we wanted, of course, for sure, as a company, you have to make money, but we also wanted this to make money for the cultural heritage site themselves. Partly because we need to be able to obviously show to future places we're approaching that, look, okay, it does cost this amount to make the game, but you're going to earn this amount, you know, and until we can demonstrate that from a test case, obviously that's hard. So that's sort of what we're trying to do with the Mary Rose. And also just because we want these cultural heritage sites to benefit, both in terms of getting new audiences in, but also in terms of kind of tapping into those digital audiences, hence why we made the game both remote and in museum, because, you know, the UK and several other countries obviously have so many cultural heritage sites and they don't maximize their reach at all in many cases, not in all cases. You know, like the US audience is interested, the Australian audience is interested, you know, in the Tower of London, for example. And yeah, and that digital reach isn't really being capitalized. So that was another reason to, so yeah, so we're talking to a couple of, that's your question. And I would love, we're currently talking to UK based locations, ones that you would know of if I mentioned them. But I'm really interested in taking this elsewhere as well. I mean, Italy, I love Italy and it's got so much potential. It's a little bit harder to get things commissioned because it's just a slightly more administratively laborious process. But you know, I'd love to do something in like the Roman Forum or with the Colosseum. Actually, the Roman Forum probably fascinates me more than the Colosseum does, if I'm honest. But yeah, so they're not in the works quite yet.
Just dream sites, yeah. I remember because I'm my family's Greek, so we went to Greece when I was very young. I think I was probably 8, and so the Acropolis was very boring to me. But I can, but I can picture like how much more interesting it would be because I didn't know anything about the Mary Rose. It's just not taught in histories here.
No.
I was fascinated by it. I started talking to my parents and a bunch of other people about like, did you know about this? So it was really cool. And I like the styling of it. It was kind of, it felt like a really historically accurate escape room. Was that like, what was your inspiration for the essentially gameplay of it?
Yeah, so I mean, I've got to be honest, I'm not a gamer. Not to say I haven't played games. I have obviously played some games, but I wouldn't describe myself as a gamer. So I guess I was coming at it more from a traditional storytelling perspective. But I also love a trail-based sort of clue game, and I actually quite love an escape game as well. So I think probably just because my experience has been more of those types of games, because they're the ones I like myself, then yes, they probably did kind of loosely inspire what we did with this. But in terms of the historical accuracy, I mean, yeah, we were kind of blessed because they've got a very dedicated like lead historian down at the Mary Rose who's literally been there since she was pulled out of the water in 1982. Oh, wow. So it's been her entire life. She has lived this ship. So, you know, if you ever had a question or you know, there was something somewhere where you wanted to kind of extract a clue but weren't quite sure where, you know, she was a brilliant place, Dr. Alexandra Hildred. And she was awesome. So
that's awesome.
That was cool.
I have to ask because I'm a dog person. My dog is sitting on my lap right now, just out of view. But so where did Hatch, the dog, the little kind of help you out with the AR technology come from?
So Hatch was the only animal they found on board, other than, you know, I'm sure there were rats. I'm not sure if they found any rat skeletons. I didn't actually ask, but the only domestic pet type animal that was found on board was Hatch, and they do have his entire skeleton. It is in the museum, and they know that he was a kind of greyhound terrier cross. And so we kind of looked at some other dogs. In fact, I stopped a few poor people on the street, like, excuse me, like, what is your dog? You know, because it kind of looked like it could be. And then I took various photos, and yeah, we had a bit of fun with it. But yeah, so Hatch's real skeleton you can see there in the museum.
Oh.
Obviously, you meet the animated Hatch. We had an actor who I find very funny called Michael Ansley, you know, voice him, which I like, which I enjoyed. And then we also have where to sort of tell you where to stand in the museum. There's also kind of paw prints and things so that you
That's
kind of
cute.
Yeah. So that's where, yeah, he's also historically accurate. He's I mean, not exactly, because he's obviously an animated character, so we played a bit with proportion, but he's, you know, largely historically accurate.
He kind of looked like my dog, so I immediately got
sweet.
a little, yeah.
Yeah, my dog, and I'm also a dog person. Mine's lying dead on the floor here. Not actually dead, but dead in the heat.
Yeah. So my last question for you, because the game is about a historical mystery that's still like technically unsolved.
Yeah.
If you could have any historical mystery solved for you and you could know the answer, what would you pick?
Oh, wow. What a question. Oh my goodness. I have to think for a second.
My brain goes to DB Cooper just because do you know DB Cooper?
No.
The guy in Northwest United States in the 70s or the 60s, 70s or 80s, sometime around there. He hijacked a plane, asked for $200,000, parachuted out. He's never been found. Bits of the money have been found, but he's never been found. Nobody knows who he was. There's a fake name. And like a bunch of people have claimed to be him over the years. So it's like some weird kind of like, nobody was harmed in his hijacking. He didn't hurt anybody. He just took the money and parachuted out. So I would love to know who he was.
Oh, wow. Yeah, no, I don't know about that. We have to look into that a bit more. I bet there's some good books on that one. No, I think I would go way further back in history.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. It's sort of yeah, there's a couple of mysteries actually. I mean, one is this, I don't know if you've ever heard of the ancient Greek woman who was almost empress called Agrippina. Yeah. But she is basically painted as like one of the blackest figures from Roman history. And it's more that the mystery of like discovering if she really was that, you know, that evil. Because, you know, she's sort of, you know, she's accused of attempting the murder of her brother, and then she, you know, she gave birth to Nero, Emperor Nero, and later she tried to murder Nero, and you know, and you just sort of wonder, is this kind of history, you know, giving women a hard time? Like she was maybe just a very ambitious woman, but then they painted her really black because she was female, and that wasn't what women were supposed to sort of be like. They weren't supposed to be ambitious, or was she actually this evil? You know, I'm quite fascinated by that, but I'm not sure it's really a mystery as such. So I could probably come up with a better one with a bit of time. But
no, that's super interesting. So thank you so much. It was really fun to play from home. I can't imagine what it would be like to actually go to the museum.
Yeah,
hopefully one day.
I think the home one is fun. I think that the, you know, the museum one just ups it one more notch. Because you've got the sense, obviously. But yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed the home version as well.
Yeah, it was really great. So thank you so much for your time. That's all the questions I've got.
Oh, great. Well, lovely to meet you, Tina.
Nice to meet you too.